in 1976 in September engaged in one of the most incredible of all UFO experiences, the famous Tehran dogfight, the chase of a UFO over Tehran in September of 1976. He's going to give us his personal account of this, what became known as the Tehran dogfight. And also, we're going to discuss a document that he has obtained about the Tehran dogfight, written here in the United States. And we're going to hear some very new things today about the Tehran dogfight, and some new material as well from Dr. Roger Leir, who is with us. And Dr. Leir, before we start with General Jafari, why don't we just update you folks on Dr. Leir's current activities, which, as you know, are always extraordinary. Dr. Leir, welcome to the show.
Nice to be with you again, Whitley.
Well, thank you. Why don't you give us a little update? You've got a new book out, and why don't you tell us?
Yes, we have a new book on the 1996 Virginia, Brazil episode, simply entitled UFO Crash in Brazil. And it's the story of my personal investigation and interview with some outstanding witnesses, including an orthopedic surgeon who was forced by the military to perform a surgery on one of the alien beings.
Which is one of the all-time most extraordinary UFO stories that has ever been told. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about it?
Well, the Virginia case, essentially the date agreed upon is January the 20th of 1996, when NORAD had notified the Brazilian military that a craft was coming down. So they knew the exact geographical position of where and what time it was going to impact. The impact itself and approach was witnessed by several different people. One was a farmer, and he saw a cylindrical object coming down, and not actually in a crash mode, but slowly approaching, and the witness says that it would appear that there was a piece missing out of the back of it, and that it was trailing a vapor or smoke substance before it impacted. Now, this was the beginning, but certainly not the end of the story, because following this, there were possibly two alien beings that were seen. Now, one of the things I did during my investigation was try to remove the rumors from the facts. So in the book, I've dedicated a whole section to that, because some people report as many as 11 or 12 beings, but we only know that there were two for sure. And these beings were described by several different individuals, and one was taken by the military. This was the Army, to two different hospitals in Virginia, Brazil. And at one of the hospitals, an orthopedic surgeon on staff was coerced by the military into performing the repair of a fractured leg on this alien being. The story is absolutely true. It's fantastic. It's been compared to Roswell, but I think it's going to far exceed the importance of Roswell, because there are a continuous number of witnesses that are coming forth. This also involves the death of a military police officer who died under mysterious circumstances. And last year, another doctor by the name of Dr. Furtado came forth and told why this young 23-year-old Brazilian military police officer, Marco Eli Chareze, what went on and how he was treated and so on. And all indications looks like he died of a extreme viral infection, possibly similar to Ebola. So that's just a small slice of the story, Willie.
And you can read that story in Roger's book, which is available from any bookstore, and you can certainly get it on Amazon.com, which I would do if you don't have a copy. This case is one of the great all-time classics. Now, I would very much like to turn to General Jafari at this point, and because things are changing in the UFO world a lot. There is a more and more worldwide a groundswell of interest on the part of scientists to make some changes in the way that we deal, or rather don't deal, with this phenomenon. And some politicians are getting involved in this too. For example, the former Canadian Minister of Defense, Paul Hellyer, is about to give a speech at the University of Toronto entitled "Why Information Concerning Extraterrestrial-Related Phenomena and Government Involvement with These Issues is Still Being Withheld from the Public by Specific Western Nations." And that is going to be really a watershed speech, because it's the first time that anyone in any Western country of such high stature is going to make a statement like that this publicly in that kind of a forum. So things are changing, and I'm very pleased to welcome General Jafari to this radio program. General, in 1976, you were a major in the Iranian Air Force. Could you tell us what happened in September of that year?
That night, one of the citizenship of the Tehran, the capital city of Iran, lady called the tower, and he was worrying about what is something was flying overhead after her area, and a couple of...
So she telephoned as a witness and said that there was something strange in the air over Tehran?
That's correct. And that was maybe 2 or 3 more phone calls, and actually the towerman didn't pay too much mention of it. But finally, he decided to look out there with the binocular, and he saw it. And then he called the Air Force, and the Air Force, General Yousefi, he asked for a scramble out from our base. The first aircraft took off, and after that, maybe 15 minutes behind that aircraft, I flew. And the first one followed the UFO, or whatever could say, and from over the sky of Tehran toward the north, and couldn't catch him because the speed was variable, and he was almost flying the speed of sound with the full afterburner, and still couldn't catch it.
Were you able to see the thing?
Well, first he took off, and when I took off, I asked him what's going on. He said, I'm following it. I see it. It's very brilliant and very fast, moving any direction. And when I approach it, my radio failure and everything happens. So because of some other border reason with the Russia at that time, I told him I was his commander. I was the squadron commander. So I ordered him to reverse toward Tehran, because he was the position was almost toward the Russia's border. When he came back, he said, after return 180 degrees, turned the aircraft toward Tehran. Now I saw it again ahead of me, and 12 o'clock, and that was really wondering, changing the position that fast. So by the time I asked him, where do you see it? He said, almost over the dam. When I looked that area, I saw it too. So we could see both airplanes with the 4 crews, one backseater, each aircraft has the radar operator. So I saw it also. Now I.
What did it look like?
Well, what I saw, it was just light in like a diamond shape in the 4 corner of it. One color was flashing red, blue, green, and orange. Couldn't see the shape because the light was so brilliant and was bothering the eyes when it was flashing, and couldn't see the shape of the thing. And by the time I told that aircraft pilot to go back home if he has enough fuel, he said yes, he can. So he made it back home toward the home base, and I followed it. As it was in my 12 o'clock, all of a sudden I saw it moved about 10 degrees to the right of me. So I had to turn, and that was so fast, couldn't follow by the eyes, replacing. I mean, the trace of it couldn't be chased. That was just a light under 12 o'clock, all of a sudden, and 1 o'clock. Just like that. And then in this situation, every time 10 degrees, 10 degrees, 10 degrees, so we face it toward the south of Tehran. And in a very open area with no lights on the ground, the weather was not cloudy, it was clear sky. And I was climbing also. At 24,000 feet, I asked the tower if they have it, the approach has it in the radar. They said, no, the radar is out of there, it is under repair. So how about you? By the time my babysitter said, sir, I got it in the radar.
General Jafari, we're going to have to take a little break right now. When we get back, we're going to go back on that jet with General Jafari and that extraordinary experience and find out just what he thought was happening. We'll be right back. Subscribers, this is just a quick note to let you know that the new 2006 Crop Circle calendars are in. They are really beautiful. If you enter the special subscriber coupon code CAL1, that's CAL1, as you check out of the unknowncountry.com store, you'll get an additional $1 off. That's plus your 10% subscriber discount, plus you automatically get the 2005 calendar thrown in free. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to Dr. Roger Lear and retired General Parviz Jafari, the former commander of the Iranian Air Force, who was personally involved in the chase of a UFO in over Tehran in 1976, known as the Tehran dogfight, one of the great UFO encounters of all time, because these young men, then young men, like as all of us were back in 1976, Roger and General Jafari, were crack pilots. General Jafari was no amateur at the stick. He knew what he was doing. He was one of the at that time one of the outstanding pilots in the Iranian Air Force. Eventually rose to command that Air Force in more recent years. Now, General, you were chasing this. What was going through your mind? What were you thinking this might be?
Actually, we didn't know what is it, but we wanted to find out what is it. That's why when my babysitter locked on it, I told him to break lock. So I see he's not locking on the top of a mountain or something. Mm-hmm. So when he break locked, I saw it is above the horizon on the climbing path of me. So it couldn't be any, after 24,000 feet, couldn't be any mountain, top of mountain or something. And right. I told him to paint it. He repainted it again, and I could find out now that the size of it.
Now, when you say painted, what do you mean?
But with the radar, when the radar is operating.
To operate the radar and aim it at the thing.
Yes.
It's the radar sweep. As the needle sweeps over the object, it's called painting.
Okay.
Yes. When it was sweeping, you could see the size of the target. What is it? So, because we had many practice of air refueling with the jumbo aircraft, I could imagine, I could figure out that the size of it is something about 2 times of the radar reflecting of a jumbo jet. Now, as you know, the radar reflects only on the surface which the radar wave returns it, so you can't say the actual size of the thing, of the target. Now, also we could find out that what is its altitude. It was about 7,000 or 8,000 feet still above of us, and we had on that time about 150 knots closing to him.
Wow! So you weren't going all that fast then, 150 knots.
No, actually, anytime he was or it was, I don't know what to say, was changing the position or altitude or anything, couldn't do anything about it. But on that time, it was stationary ahead of me, and I could see it and with the radar. By the time I was looking in and out, inside the radar and also outside of it, of course my weapon was on the radar missiles. So all of a sudden I saw something separated from underneath it, a round thing like a moon, but as you see the moon about half of the size of the moon when you look it from the ground. So, and a little dimmer than the moon, and came down below the horizon and head toward of me. Well, that's the place, but I thought he launched a missile toward me. Now, the radar was locked on the main thing, and there was a very short time. We couldn't break lock from the main thing and lock on the second one or the missile or whatever it is. It was in my imagination, so I forget about the radar missile, and I decided to select the heat seeking, the A9 missile, to shoot to the thing it was coming toward me. When I selected with my finger and I looked to the panel, I saw there was no lights. All of the lights were gone, and no arming lights, no nothing. And all of the indicators were fluctuating or turning around, and so I decided to get away from him. If the impact happens or close to impact, when we jump out, I don't want to get in the blast of it.
So you had become disoriented, do you think? What exactly was happening at that point?
No, I wasn't disoriented. I knew what's going on. Well, what I knew, I thought that was my thinking, that it is a missile coming toward me. So I decided to turn away, and if it comes closer, I jump out, so the impact will happen ahead of where we are in there with the parachute. So we don't go in the blast of impact of the missile with the aircraft.
Let me interject something here. Excuse me, but I just want to have the listeners understand that this was sort of tenuous times in Iran, because Iraq was on one border and the Soviet Union was doing some shenanigans. I hope the general will have time to mention what they did by trying to capture an Air Force F-4. But so you have to realize the general's attitude at this time was that he didn't know what it was, and so he was taking defensive action, the best action that he could, by launching his missile against what he thought was an unknown possible missile.
Hello?
Yes.
That's correct. That was my quick action to be safe. After all.
So you were basically it was an effort to evade at that point.
Pardon me?
You were making an effort to evade at this point. You thought that you were under attack.
Yes, that's true. And then by the time when I start left turn, my angle of turn was not too high because I wanted to see the thing on my right windshield, on my right shoulder, so to know when it's going to be closer to decide to eject from the aircraft. Now, I took a look to the left side to see where am I if I jump out. I just, maybe a second, I just took take a look to the left side and then to the right again. I missed him, and I said, "Oh my God!" My backseater said, "Sir, that was in our 7 o'clock on that time," and my backseater said, "Now it is on." I'm sorry. The first time when I looked to the left, first it was on my right side, and
yes.
At 4 o'clock. Then I took a look to the left side, and my backseater said it is now on our left side on 7 o'clock.
Now, let me ask you this. At that point, did you happen to check the time? Had any unusual amount of time passed during this moment, or did it seem that the thing just moved instantaneously?
Oh, no. In a panic situation like that, you don't take a look to the watch, to the clock.
No, of course not. I knew the answer to the question. But what do you think happened? Do you think that it moved instantaneously, or was a second object perhaps, or?
No, that was the same thing, just changed the position very fast from the 4 o'clock to my 7 o'clock. I think within a second, I just took a look to my left side and right side, and it was disappeared, and my backseater said it moved to the left side, so at 7 o'clock. So when I took a look to that position, I saw it, and it started to move away from me. Now I could see again the main object far away from us, and in a circle, in a round path, it approached to the main thing, went underneath it, and I don't know if the same one or the other one, the same thing, came out of it immediately from underneath it and started to circle around us. By the time the small thing went away, now we could get in contact with the tower again, and the garble inside the radio in the interphone was disappeared. Now we could talk with each other in the aircraft with the backseater a little better. And I reported shortly what's going on, and
we're going to, General, we're going to have to take a little break, so we're going to find out about that report in just a moment. We're talking today to General Parviz Jafari, the former commander of the Iranian Air Force, about his personal experience chasing a UFO over Tehran in 1976, and with him, Dr. Roger Lear, the author of UFO Crash in Brazil, available from any bookstore, from any online bookstore. You must not miss it. It's an important book. It contains some of the most profound material about human alien contact that has ever been put down on paper, so do not miss it. We'll be right back. We're back talking to General Parviz Jafari about his experience in a dogfight of a UFO, not a dogfight, but attempting to chase a UFO over Tehran in 1976, and you now at this point, General, you reported back to the base, and what happened then?
It was, I had a tour the base, and one of those things which was circling us, that was really something unusual. Now you can imagine in a football place, when the people playing football.
Yes, right, a stadium.
The stadium. If someone wants to run from one side to the other side and one take a round trip around that stadium, it takes very fast and a very long time to do it. But these things were circling us very, very quickly. So you can imagine how fast was the speed. I can't say how many times of the speed of sound that was moving.
Well, that must have been a shocking experience to be in a jet and just be... You must have been used to being in the fastest thing in the sky, and suddenly...
That's correct.
Yeah.
And by the time we started to descend and toward the base, one thing which... after the landing, I had forgotten it, but my backseater, he approved it when we were listening to the tape of the tower. That was, one of them was chasing me, and I reported, but after landing, I just forgot it, and I asked my backseater, I don't remember when I said this. He said, that's correct. That's exactly what happened. And
so you said, you reported at one point that one of them was chasing you, but you have no memory of actually doing that?
No. That's correct.
How strange.
So, however, after we approached to the base for landing, in the turning to final situation in the base leg, I saw something is coming from the north of the city toward me, which is all mountain, and there should be no traffic, never, because the mountain is so high there. And I asked the tower, what is the traffic ahead of me coming from this area? And he said, we have no traffic except an Air Kansas is flying at 33,000 feet overhead. We have no traffic. And when I turned, I could see that like a ruler with the two lights on the tip of the two sides of it, very dim light, a dim white light, and at the middle it was a amber light. And by the time I was turning to the final from the base leg, that was overhead of us. So I was, my eyes was on the wrong way to make my approach. But my backseater later on said, on the turn I could see around the thing over that ruler with light in it, and could see that one too. But I didn't see that. He saw it. However, we were approaching to the base, and I took a left, on my left side, took a glance to see where is that thing. I saw the main thing again on the south of the city at high altitude, and one of those round things which was following in there,
yes,
separated from the main ship and direct to the ground, with which I thought I will be seeing a very big impact and explosion on the ground because it was approaching to the ground very fast, but that didn't happen. Just came to the ground and stationary there without impact, very, very bright, which I could see from that position, that distance. All the fans on the ground were visible because of the light. It wasn't so brilliant to bother the eyes. It just could see. We could see the ground. Now I reported that, and General Yousefi was on the phone, was listening all of our conversation. So he ordered the powerman and said that the order is go ahead and take a look over that one. So I retracted the gear and turned to the left to go to that area. When I was approaching maybe about 4 or 5 miles to that area, again all of the indicator was fluctuating, and also the radio has lots of garble. So I said, this is the situation. I think it's dangerous, but if you say so, I will go. And they said, no, don't go. Just come back.
Return to base.
So, yes. So I approached to the base and we landed. Maybe after 1 hour, still that thing was in the air, and the people in the tower and General Yousefi, they were seeing it on the air. And in this flight, all the time we could hear a siren, for example, like ambulance or police.
Inside your planes?
No, yes, in the phone. In the
radio.
In the radio, yes.
How strange. So it was.
And it was there for next 2 days. The next morning, of course, at the time we landed, it was 1:30 at midnight, and the next morning we took a helicopter, and they ordered me to go there and find it. We did so with the ADF of the helicopter. We went toward the bearing, and
that is to say, ADF is a radio direction finder, folks. So
yes,
basically you were out in the helicopter searching for the source of this signal.
Right, inside the helicopter, and with the ADF automatic directional finder, we approached the area, but we couldn't see anything on the ground. Nothing, even nothing. That was dry lake, and underneath it there was nothing, some housing area far away, and we landed there and asked the people if they saw anything last night. They said no, they just heard a very big sound and some lights, but when they came out they didn't see anything. Unfortunately, we couldn't have any evidence on the ground.
How extraordinary.
Yeah. But for more than 2 days, that the siren was still there, and all the aircraft, the military, and even the airliner, they were reporting that they're hearing that sirens, but nobody could find anything. That's all. If you have any more questions, please, I will be answering.
Well, I do have one more question. Did you at any time experience any kind of disorientation during this process, the whole experience?
Can't say disorientation, but maybe more than I can't say 100 times, 200 times at night I flew over that area in Tehran and approach landing with the students or myself. But that night, all of a sudden, I couldn't find the runway, and I wasn't disoriented, but I was some kind of lost.
As if all of these familiar landmarks were no longer familiar?
Pardon me?
As if the familiar landmarks were no longer familiar.
Yeah, it was familiar. Everything was familiar. I could see the city, everything, but I didn't know where I am. That was happened when that thing was chasing us.
So it seems like it affected your short-term memory somewhat.
Probably.
Yeah.
That's what later on I thought about it. And that time I didn't know what happened, but that's why I went through my TACAN and ILS to find out my way to the final. And when I find it out now, I disregarded that and I could see the runway and go ahead and continue my approach to the base. That thing had, I can't say disorientation, but I don't know what can I...
Just a strange state of mind. Yeah. But General, I would like to thank you for having been with us here on Dreamland. General Parviz Jafari, formerly of the retired Iranian Air Force, telling us an absolutely extraordinary and unforgettable story about the famous Tehran UFO dogfight. When we get back, Dr. Roger Lear is going to be talking to us about the medical exam that General Jafari took after reporting this sense of confusion that he felt on the way as he was landing in Tehran. We're also going to be discussing the document that he left with us and Roger's impressions of it. We'll tell you exactly what's in that document when we get back. This is Whitley Strieber. I am with Dr. Roger Lear. His latest book, UFO Crash in Brazil. Dr. Lear knows whereof he speaks. Who else is going to bring you a historic experience like this, listening to General Jafari telling firsthand his experience in the UFO dogfight over Iran? What a wonderful show, Roger. Thank you for bringing General Jafari to this program.
Well, Whitley, I thought this was so important that when the opportunity arose, this was the channel to get some of this information out. We've been trying to get him into the country for 7 years, and it was very difficult doing so. And for some reason, like you mentioned in the beginning of the program, it looks like things are maybe changing. So lo and behold, he does get over here, and it was a wonderful opportunity. I talked with him in the past on the telephone, and I was really impressed with the encounter that he went through. Now, there's so many things that are involved in the case, it's just impossible to get it all within the short time that we have. But perhaps in the future we will do a video, because I did a 1.5-hour interview with the general, and when this is done, we will make this available to the audience.
Well, I would love, of course, it would be wonderful to get such a thing, and when it becomes available, and we'll hopefully be able to carry it on the UnknownCountry.com store. Now let's get on talking a little bit about the general. He had a medical examination after he landed, didn't he?
Yes, each of the 4 individuals was ordered to go to the hospital for a medical examination, and there was secrecy behind the examination. He didn't know, he didn't have knowledge of what they did to the other pilot or the 2 other navigators. But they did a thorough examination on him, even using the Geiger counter. And he left the hospital. They didn't tell him anything. He was walking away from the hospital doors when a doctor came out and pursued him, called him back, and he asked him to come in for further testing. And he said, "Why are you asking me to come back? You just told me everything was fine." And the doctor says, "Well, I really can't tell you, General, or Major at that time, but please please come in and there's a few more tests that we want to run. Well, he didn't really accept this and wanted to know more, and the doctor, under duress, told him that his blood would not clot.
His blood would not clot?
That's correct.
And how long did this, do they have any explanation for this whatsoever?
No, he never received any explanation. We don't know if the medical records are still available or long gone, but I thought this was rather astounding. And during the interview that we did on camera, I've asked the general if he thought that the United States had any interest in this case. And his answer was surprising. He said, "No, I really don't think so." Now, this follows on the heels of his debriefing, where he's telling us that there was an American military officer standing there during the debriefing with a clipboard taking notes. And I said, "Didn't you think that was unusual?" And his answer was no, because Iran was on good terms with the U.S., and there were a number of military liaison on Iranian bases. So he thought this was just, general interest by the Americans. And then on camera, I downloaded the Department of Defense document on this case, which was 3 pages, and I handed it to him. He was utterly astounded. I said, "Now, do you think the U.S. had any interest in the case?" And he said, "Well, yes, I think so." So a lot of things
this Department
here.
of Defense document, could you describe this to us a little bit more?
Well, it was a document that I had been turned on to from our good friend John Greenwald, which he had gotten through the Freedom of Information Act and had on the Black Vault site. And when I told him about this, he was very familiar with the Iranian incident. He offered to send me the link, and I was downloaded. It's a 3-page document written on the Department of Defense letterhead. And some of it, of course, is blacked out, but the majority of it is readable, and it's the entire story of the case.
So the Defense Department was interested. Now, I am looking at a document that you faxed me, date September 18, 1976, location Tehran, Iran, Tehran dogfight. And the details as to, I guess, who this is to and who it's from have been blacked out. And this is quite a remarkable document, though, Roger, because it describes the thing in detail, and it goes on to say, an outstanding report. This case is a classic which meets all criteria necessary for a valid study of the UFO phenomena. A, the object was seen by multiple witnesses from different locations and viewpoints. B, the credibility of many witnesses was high. C, visual sightings were confirmed by radar. D, similar electromagnetic effects were reported by the 3 separate aircraft. E, there were physiological effects on some of the crew members, i.e. loss of night vision due to brightness of the object. D, an inordinate amount of maneuverability was displayed by the UFOs. Now, who do you think this document... First, let me back up. Did the general just recently gave you this document, didn't he?
Yes, that's correct.
Does he know who it was? How did he tell you where he had found it?
No, but he has a number of different things. One is that he has the cassette recording of his conversation, all during this episode with the tower. And number 2, he has his written log. Now, unfortunately, they're not here. They're still in Iran, but they are available, and we can get them.
Now, the document goes on to say, so what did the Iranians encounter that night in 1976? While it is tantalizing to imagine an extraterrestrial aircraft was over Tehran, there's no distinct evidence this was the case, merely the suggestion of advanced technology at work. But was it non-human technology? Iran bordered the Soviet Union, and prior to the overthrow of the Shah was a major client of the United States. Subsequent events in other countries For example, the abduction case of Frank Fontaine in France in 1979 suggests the possibility that UFO events are sometimes staged by military and intelligence operatives. What do you make of that?
Well, it sounds like somebody has put out some disinformation tagged on to the end of this thing because in 1976, let's say post-Roswell, we're not talking about that many years of back engineering. If we had any kind of this technology in 1976, I think that it would have become more public knowledge than what we have for just one incident in Iran. So looks to me, I mean, that's the way I look at it, that somebody added this on at the end of it to make sure this wasn't taken as a true non-terrestrial event.
Now, the Frank Fontaine case is it's a French case that's wrapped in controversy as to it happened in 1975. As to what actually did occur, in 1979, now this seems to be suggesting that it was a military thing, and I have to tell you this. I had an experience in Paris with two Frenchmen who alleged to me that they worked for the French government, who induced an experience of missing time in me so completely seamless that I didn't even know it had happened, that the time had passed until afterwards. I've described it on this radio program a number of times, so I won't describe it again today. But suffice to say, it does seem to me that there may be advanced technology in the hands of some people, but certainly not of any major governments, because they would be misusing them in ways that we would know.
Yes, I agree with you. And, here we have four different pilots, two pilots flying F-4s and two navigators. We have the physical effects on the aircraft and, a number of other things which represent technologies that, we don't even have a hint of this even in present day if we can do it. But we got to remember, this was back in 1976. Now, some of the so-called disorientation that General Jafari had on his approach to the return to Tehran Air Base was unexplainable. And again, in this document, it says that there are physiological effects on the crew members, such as the loss of night vision due to brightness. But I asked him about that, and he said no, he could see clearly, but he just couldn't recognize anything, and evidently indicating a state of confusion. Also, he is willing to be hypnotically regressed because there's a possibility here of missing time.
I think there is too, and I asked him about that, and he didn't seem to think that was the case. But I have to tell you that I had a close encounter experience once that didn't involve any missing time, in the sense that I remembered it very well. In the morning afterwards, I couldn't even remember the English language. I remember the radio turned itself on, and I was appalled that it didn't seem to be speaking an intelligible language, and it took me about half an hour to get to the point where I could remember English. I couldn't read anything. We tried to go to church, and when I got out into the streets, I couldn't. The streets were totally unfamiliar to me, and it was eerily similar to his description of coming into Tehran and finding everything strangely unfamiliar.
Well, there was one other thing. During his debriefing, he was asked about this conversation with the tower during a certain point in the episode, and he denied ever having that conversation until it was played back on the tape. He had no knowledge of it whatsoever.
That's so strange. So strange. So what do you think happened to him?
Well, based on other experiences with people, in my investigations and reading the literature and delving into this subject, as strange as it seems, I think that he and his aircraft were instantaneously removed from that spot. Who knows what technology that is done and then placed back again.
So,
and I think that might account for the strange physiological effects.
Yeah.
I think he had basically a close encounter of the fourth kind.
I think he probably did too. Well, we may know one of these days if he. I wonder what would happen if he ever went under hypnosis. I'm sure the situation between our two countries is too sensitive to even suggest that to him now, but nevertheless, maybe in the future. Roger, what are you up to these days? What are you working on just now, if I may ask? Before we.
Well, I have 2 more possible surgeries to do, implant-wise. I have a case with an object in the foot, and another case that has a lady who has an object in the neck and in the forehead region, and we need CAT scans to confirm exactly where these are, and then, of course, the finances to go ahead and do the surgery, which is rather nil these days. It's more of the same old problem. Also, I've been invited to speak in Italy at the first exobiology conference at the University of Calabria. That will be the first of next month, and it's an international conference. So this is the first also. And then I've been invited back to Brazil next year, probably to Curitiba, but I will go to Virginia and try and interview more of the witnesses again.
Well, Roger, incidentally, the Frank Fontaine case, folks, I have been searching my mind for this case, and I've remembered it now, and I'll just sum it up for you. Frank Fontaine was a 20-year-old kid. I believe this took place in the south of France in 1979, and at the end of November, a light appeared around his car, and he disappeared for 3 or 4 days. He returned, reappeared, and was amnesiac about what happened, and I don't believe he ever recovered much memory of it, but it was believed to be a UFO abduction. Now, this document suggests that it might have been something connected with military intelligence, which is, of course, possible. But in any case, that's the case. I don't want to distract us with it because I don't think it's a very important story in that there was never any proof of what did or didn't happen to this young man, except that he just disappeared for a few days, and nobody could, including him, could understand why. Okay, so that's the Fontaine case for those of you who are curious about it, and I hope I'm right about it. I know a lot of UFO cases, and I'm just pulling this out of my head. In any case, speaking of cases, we're coming to the end of our time together with Dr. Roger Leir in Dreamland. Dr. Leir's website, alienscalpel.com. Don't miss it because you can keep up with his work there. And could you find your way to contributing a little bit of money to it? He's got another implant surgery he wants to do, and it would be exciting if he could get to doing that, and you could help. So give Alien Scalpel a look and see what you can do. Roger, it's been a pleasure having you with us, and thank you again so much for bringing General Jafari to this radio program and this historic interview. Thank you, Roger.
You're entirely welcome, Willie.
Okay, so next up, Linda Moulton Howe. We'll be right back. You're about to experience something that you just can't get elsewhere. Emmy award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe reporting on the absolute leading edge of science discovery and the true mysteries of the unknown. Don't miss her website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the secrets and gives you the facts the others dare not. earthfiles.com. This week, she's reporting on gigantic Burmese pythons being found in Florida's Everglades. These are 15-foot-long monster snakes. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
That's right, Whitley, and they can even get up to 25 feet. Until recently, the top predator in the Florida Everglades has been the American alligator. The males can grow to nearly 15 feet long and a couple of feet wide. The females are a little smaller, around 10 feet. Those alligators and those long teeth and claws are lethal weapons, and their jaws are like steel traps. Nothing wanted to take them on until people started throwing They're unwanted Burmese python pet snakes in the Everglades. Why? To get rid of the uncontrollable monsters after they have been nice little 2 to 3 foot babies, but they grow up to be 20 feet long or more. And the python has a hinged jaw that allows it to swallow large prey after it has squeezed its victim to death. Now, since 2003, there have been at least 4 known python battles with American alligators. 2 resulted in a draw, and 2 seemed to favor the alligator. The last encounter was definitely a draw when both creatures died. That's the photograph that went around the world in early October of a python body partially engulfing an alligator. The python's head was missing, and its belly seemed to have burst, perhaps from indigestion, after swallowing most or all of the alligator. The location for this amazing scene was about 3 to 4 miles northwest of what is called the Paiute Overlook, and that means river of grass in Seminole Indian language. The remarkable scene was photographed the late afternoon of September 26th by an Everglades helicopter pilot, and you can see several other photographs of the snake with eyes that were bigger than its stomach at my website, www.earthfiles.com. This Dreamland report is at the top of the headlines page about the Burmese python that tried to eat an American alligator. It was early the next morning on September 27th that Everglades National Park wildlife biologist Skip Snow went back to the scene with a pilot, and they ended up doing what they call a floating necropsy in waist-deep water. Originally, the 2 men had hoped to fly the python and alligator to a lab, but the flesh was too soft from decomposition after death. Some wondered if the alligator had been alive when it was swallowed and might have clawed its way literally out of the snake's belly. But Skip Snow told me this week he found definite evidence that the 6.5-foot-long alligator had been inside the 13-foot-long python.
It was quite extraordinary. I had never seen anything like that. We had seen other encounters before, but certainly not one where we could confirm that a snake at least tried or had at one time had the alligator entirely within the digestive tract, which is what we deduced from looking at the intestinal tract, was that at one point the alligator was indeed all the way inside the snake, but then for some reasons as yet not fully known, the side split and burst, and so here was sort of a half alligator, half snake creature looking anyway.
Boy. And so from your point of view of having worked in the Florida Everglades for a long time, you had never seen something like a python having tried to eat an alligator before.
No, we've never witnessed that. When I opened the snake, the tissue was quite soft, so it wasn't too difficult to sort of dissect the lower portion of it and the gut and see that the head and the shoulders of the animal were still wrapped by the stomach muscle. So that was pretty clear that it had been in the digestive tract. And
what had happened to the python's head?
Well, I don't know for sure, obviously, but my best guess, having looked at other carcasses, especially in wetland systems or in water where there is water about, once the carcass floats or is bloated and then it is floating, the head, being such as it is denser and doesn't float as well as the rest of the body, and so it hangs down. It's the first to hang down in the water, and I believe that the absence of the head came from was post-mortem after the snake's death, and probably was the result of scavenging turtles, some kinds of fish, crayfish, things like that that have come and nibbled away at the head that was hanging down in the water. It certainly was one of the most extraordinary things I've seen, and more than that, underscored by the fact that here's this large, extraordinarily large predator that's never before occurred in the wild in the North American continent. Now we are faced with the fact that it's here, it's breeding, it's out here in the wild. I think that it almost borders on the absurd that I even have to deal with it. That it's now a condition of and a part of my job to have to consider what to do with this. It's almost beyond thinking sometimes to look at this.
But you're now having to deal with an Asian Burmese python in addition to the big American alligator.
Yeah, well, I mean, the big alligator was that's not a problem, and that's a known because it's a native here. The absurdity of it is the size and scale of this predatory animal being the python that's been introduced, and now and really it's something we, the collective human we've done to ourselves. It's not like these snakes have stowed away and come over unbeknownst to us, or despite our best efforts have made their way here like an exotic flu virus. We did this to ourselves. We trade in these animals, we sell, we breed, we move animals about, and within the pet trade at large, we always run the risk of something like this occurring. And now this is sort of the extreme absurd end of it. If you were to look at it as a willful act, thinking about how absurd it would be if someone came to me as a park biologist and proposed, we should introduce tigers to the Everglades. I mean, as a large predatory top of the line animal, let's introduce tigers. Think how absurd that is. Well, it's the same idea, just a different class of animals. But that's some days that's how it strikes me. And when I see encounters, and when I see things like this most recent incident, it's part of me just thinks how absurd that it is that I have to deal with it.
Right, and that these were basically thrown away pets that became too much for their owners.
Yeah, we believe that for the most part, what we're dealing with is a result of a number of years of intentional releases from unwanted pets. There's always a possibility that some have also come as unintentional escapees or acts of some other releases that were unintentional. But by and large, we feel that most of what we are dealing with are a result of pythons that have gotten too big. They've worn out their welcome. They've exceeded the economic abilities of the people that have owned them, or people have had to move, or the spouses no longer can tolerate, whatever the situation might be. And these animals have been turned loose over time, and now we're faced with a breeding population.
Another scientist who has been working in the Everglades since the early 1970s is Frank Mazzotti, Ph.D., Associate Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida in Fort Lauderdale. He is extremely alarmed at the rapidly spreading population of Burmese pythons that are not supposed to be in Florida. Nearly 200 Burmese pythons have been killed or removed from the Everglades just since 2003. When their bellies have been opened to see what the big snakes have been eating, many endangered species have been found, including the beautiful white ibis that the Everglades Park has tried so hard to protect. Pythons also like to go after bird eggs. Dr. Mazzotti points his finger at the exotic pet trade and says unless it is stopped or strongly curtailed, the Burmese python will continue to spread.
Burmese pythons are incredibly popular in the pet trade because they're so easy to breed and because they have their mystique of being a python. And so it's just, after all of these years, just repeated over and over again, getting more frequently, I'd say it really dramatically got everybody's attention in the last 2 years.
In just the last 2 years?
In just the last 2 years. So you can look at, say, the last 20 years, and I will bet you 90% of the pythons that have been caught in the park, certainly more than 80% have been captured in the last 2 years.
What do you think?
And part of that is because, after repeatedly letting go these pet snakes, boy snakes met girl snakes, and now we've got baby snakes, and now they're breeding. And once they started breeding, that's when the numbers started skyrocketing.
So how do you think that this Burmese python approached this alligator in the first place? Would it have tried to kill it first?
Nobody has seen one of these fights start. What I think happens is they both like the edges of wet and dry areas, and that's where they're likely to encounter each other. In one instance, it was in a small pool near a culvert underneath the road, and the alligator was observed right after it had grabbed the python, and the python was still alive. Under those circumstances, though, the alligator was able to. It was about, I think, an 8-foot alligator and a 9-foot python. The alligator was able to subdue the python and swallow it after. It took a while for the alligator to get the python down.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2004, on one of the park trails, a number of park visitors witnessed a battle between a python and an alligator that they don't know how it ended, but the alligator swam away with the python in its jaws.
Hmm.
And then the fourth one was in 2003, and that was along another park trail, and it was another battle encounter, and in that circumstances, it looked like the alligator had won, but it let go of the python, and the python swam away. And there was no evidence that the python had died as a result of the encounter. That is, they didn't find any bodies. There's one the alligator clearly won, one where the alligator probably won, one that was a draw, and one where, well, I guess there were two that were a draw, because although the python swallowed the alligator, it doesn't look to me like the python was a winner in that one.
And how did that python lose its head?
Probably another predator. It could even have been another alligator, but it depends on how far decomposed it was. And after they start decomposing, turtles and crayfish and lots smaller kinds of animals can also get involved.
So if we'd been there with a hidden camera, we might have seen the struggle. The snake somehow engorges.
You might have seen a python attack an alligator only to be subsequently attacked by a bigger alligator, which would have been, I'd like to be shopping around that footage.
And that, contrary to the first news reports, if the snake had gotten itself around that alligator, and even if the alligator was having those reflexes of clawing inside the snake, that it wasn't that the alligator got out or that the snake exploded? I think that is the most likely scenario. I'm going to give you a caveat here. That's the one where the snake swallows the alligator, doesn't digest it, dies, and they both start to decompose. Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't call it an explosion. I mean, it wouldn't be. I mean, say you have a balloon in your hand.
Right.
It wouldn't be a bang. It would be a.
Sort of like the tissue just kind of deteriorating away.
Right, and then all of a sudden the gases start getting out. And so it's definitely more of a poof than a bang. And I think rupture would be a better and more accurate term than explode. But if you're on the 6 o'clock nude, explode sounds a whole lot better.
Now, Stephen Williams, who's director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, says that the invasion of non-local animals, such as this Asian Burmese python beginning now to populate the Florida Everglades, is one of the greatest environmental threats in the United States. I wondered if you could comment on his statement.
That is absolutely true. Almost everywhere you go, there is some non-native species that's causing major problems and costing lots of money in control. Certainly, right up there with loss of habitat and pollution. And in fact, what I would say is invasion by non-native species is biological pollution,
mm-hmm.
and is just as deadly as the chemical kind.
And what is the worst case with this population explosion of the Burmese pythons in the Everglades?
You know, the worst case is it's going to have tremendous ecological impact as a top-down predator. I mean, clearly it's staking a claim to be at least an equal to the alligator. And that means that it affects every other animal that it's bigger than it can eat. It can compete with other native species, such as indigo snakes, which are endangered. Indigo snakes also get very large, 7 to 8 feet. And so for a large part of its life, indigo snakes will be competing with Burmese pythons for food.
And the Burmese python can get up to 20, 25 feet.
And then they can start eating indigo snakes. And so not only is it a competitor, but it's a potential predator. One of the things that worries everybody about Burmese pythons is that they're very much a generalist in their diet, which means they'll eat whatever is available, and they eat mammals and birds and other reptiles. There's lots of endangered species in the Everglades. I think more endangered species in Florida than any other state except maybe California.
Mm-hmm. And what you mean is it's almost like a monster in a movie that is now populating in the Everglades, coming from Asia, that can eat just about anything that it wants to.
That's correct. And since they get bigger than 20 feet, that, is pretty much anything they want to.
And what about the vulnerability of children?
Anything small is always the most vulnerable to a predator. I mean, small children are obviously more vulnerable to alligators, and certainly is no different than python. The size makes them attractive. The way they behave makes them attractive. Walking down to the water's edge, splashing around. When you're a python and you take a look, you go, yum, no hair.
And what is it that the state of Florida and or the federal government are trying to do now to control this Burmese python population explosion?
I think there's two critical steps that the state governments and the federal governments need to engage in. And one is to ask the question, and really I hope answer it, what can we do to stop pythons from being released? Because there's no control method that's going to be successful if people keep releasing pythons. I mean, that's why we're in this problem. We can't keep doing it and expect we're going to solve the problem. So that's the first step, and that's probably the responsibility of the state. Then the second issue is, what are we going to do to get rid of the pythons that are out there already? And I think it focuses on pythons in Everglades National Park, and I think what we need to do is really have an integrated research and control methodology put into place so that we start removing pythons that are out there, but at the same time we learn how to do it better and smarter and less expensively.
How do you think that should be accomplished?
I think we need to we need to follow very much the same procedures they followed in coming up with the control methods for plants like Melaleuca or Brazilian pepper. You need to understand how the animal makes a living. You need to understand what it's vulnerable to. You need to understand where it lives, when it moves, all the things that are going to make your ability to trap it and remove it more successful. So those are really on the top of the list for information that we need to have.
And if they're trapped and removed, where do you take them to?
When you have a large non-native species like this, really your only alternative is to euthanize it, because nobody wants. That's why they let the snakes go in the first place. You might say, oh, well, I'll get this python at 3 feet, I'll grow it up to 12 feet, and then I'll donate it to a zoo. Zoos don't want those animals. They have all the animals of that size that they need already. Mm-hmm. So it's impossible to get rid of snakes those size. And one that's grown up in the wild will never become accustomed to humans, and so it's never going to make a good pet. So the regretful situation that we're placed in is that we have to euthanize the snakes that we capture and remove.
So basically, the only program is capturing the pythons and killing them.
That's correct.
Skip Snow said that they're also trying a couple of other things. They're now putting out slogans on posters and various materials that basically say, don't let it loose, be a responsible pet owner. And he said they're trying to make people realize that if they get pets that they can't take care of, then people should not be letting them loose in the Everglades to kill so many other animals that the Everglades are trying to protect. Another very interesting thing is they're trying to come up with new kinds of traps, either baited or unbaited, that might be able to get the snakes safely so they could be transported someplace else. And the third is they're borrowing from what has been done in Guam and Hawaii, where they use dogs to sniff out exotic snakes. And they're going to see if they can now train dogs to go around in the Everglades sniffing out pythons. Incredible that this is having to be done, but it is almost as if in 2005 we are facing two threats from Asia, one that is microscopic and is a virus that could cause a pandemic, and the other is this gigantic python that has been carelessly and irresponsibly let loose in the Florida Everglades. And right now, that Burmese python, breeding and breeding and breeding, might reach a point where we cannot eradicate it.
And, Linda, I think it is going to probably already has passed that point. I don't think we'll be able to, and the result is that the Everglades are going to change. Unless, of course, they're all blown away by one of these hurricanes and it ends up that the streets of Miami are filled with pythons and alligators having some kind of god-awful, primitive, prehistoric war on the street corners during 100-mile-an-hour winds. I'm sorry to sound a little cynical, but God, what a world when people would, when you think the truth of the matter is, why do they even import them? Why do they allow them to be imported if this is going to happen? Who could possibly think that a 20-foot snake would be a fun pet?
And it's not. They aren't. There are increasing number of cases in which these Burmese pythons, as they get big and are allowed to sleep in the beds or the bedrooms or something of their owners, have turned on their owners. There was a case in Colorado where a teenager was killed by his quote-unquote large pet Burmese. And it is the one thing that Professor Mazzotti stressed with me. He said that if this government or if this country doesn't decide it has to get really tough on the import of exotic pets, we're going to continue to run into problems. The Burmese python being, as Skip Snow said, one of the most absurd, because until now there was no one in North America that ever thought that the huge Burmese python would be a predator problem, and now it is.
Well, Linda, as once again, every once in a while you come up with a report that's really sort of very bizarrely out of the way. And I have to tell you, there's been a time in my life when I've thought that a camping trip in the Everglades on one of those houseboats that they rent down there would really be a lot of fun. I'm not so sure that I really am looking forward to that now. The idea of a 20-foot python dropping out of a tree onto my houseboat, which would happen if it was me. No, I don't think so. And folks, I've got something else to talk about right now. We have a great guest back with us, one of Dreamland's stars, Margaret Starbird. She is the person who inspired the Da Vinci Code, and she's back with new information about Mary Magdalene. She's got a new book, Mary Magdalene, Bride in Exile. It's probably on pre-order now, I don't know, but it is
But turn on. Now I saw it again ahead of me at 12 o'clock, and that was really wondering, changing the position that fast. So by the time I asked him, where do you see it? He said, almost over the dam. When I looked that area, I saw it too. So we could see both airplanes with the 4 crews, one back-seater, each aircraft has the radar operator. So I saw it also. Now I.
What did it look like?
Well, what I saw, it was like a diamond shape in the four corner of it. One color was flashing, red, blue, green, and orange. Couldn't see the shape because the light was so brilliant and was bothering the eyes when it was flashing, and couldn't see the shape of the thing. And by the time I told that aircraft pilot to go back home if he has enough fuel, he said yes, he can. So he made it back home toward the home base, and I followed it. As it was in my 12 o'clock, all of a sudden I saw it moved about 10 degrees to the right of me. So I had to turn, and that was so fast, couldn't follow by the eyes, replacing. I mean, the trace of it couldn't be chased. That was just a light on the 12 o'clock, all of a sudden, and 1 o'clock. Just like that. And then in this situation, every time 10 degrees, 10 degrees, 10 degrees, so we face it toward the south of Tehran. And in a very open area with no lights on the ground, the weather was not cloudy, it was clear sky. And I was climbing also. At 24,000 feet, I asked the tower if they have it, the approach has it in the radar. They said, no, the radar is out of there, it is under repair. So how about you? By the time my babysitter said, sir, I got it in the radar.
General Jafari, we're going to have to D6. You were a major in the Iranian Air Force. Could you tell us what happened in September of that year?
That night, one of the citizenship of the Tehran, the capital city of Iran, lady called the tower and he was worrying about what is something was flying overhead after her area, and a couple of...
So she telephoned as a witness and said that there was something strange in the air over Tehran?
That's correct. And that was maybe 2 or 3 more phone calls, and actually the tower man didn't pay too much mention of it. But finally, he decided to look out there with the binocular, and he saw it. And then he called the Air Force, and the Air Force General Yousefi, he asked for a scramble out from our base. The first aircraft took off, and after that, maybe 15 minutes behind that aircraft, I flew. And the first one followed the UFO, or whatever could say, and from over the sky of Tehran toward the north, and couldn't catch him because the speed was variable, and he was almost flying the speed of sound with the full afterburner, and still couldn't catch it.
Were you able to see the thing?
Well, first he took off, and when I took off, I asked him what's going on. He said, I'm following it. I see it. It's very brilliant and very fast, moving any direction, and when I approach it, my radio failure and everything happens. So because of some other border reason with the Russia at that time, I told him I was his commander. I was the squadron commander. So I ordered him to reverse toward Tehran, because he was the position was almost toward the Russia's border. When he came back, he said, after return 180 degrees, turn the aircraft to...
Take a little break right now. When we get back, we're going to go back on that jet with General Jafari and that extraordinary experience and find out just what he thought was happening. We'll be right back. Subscribers, this is just a quick note to let you know that the new 2006 Crop Circle calendars are in. They are really beautiful. If you enter the special subscriber coupon code CAL1, that's CAL1, as you check out of the unknowncountry.com store, you'll get an additional $1 off. That's plus your 10% subscriber discount, plus you automatically get the 2005 calendar thrown in free. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to Dr. Roger Lear and retired General Parviz Jahari, the former commander of the Iranian Air Force, who was personally involved in the chase of a UFO in over Tehran in 1976, known as the Tehran dogfight, one of the great UFO encounters of all time, because these young men, then young men, like as all of us were back in 1976, Roger and General Jafari, were crack pilots. General Jafari was no amateur at the stick. He knew what he was doing. He was one of the at that time one of the outstanding pilots in the Iranian Air Force. Eventually rose to command that Air Force in more recent years. Now, General, you were chasing this. What was going through your mind? What were you thinking this might be?
Actually, we didn't know what is it, but we wanted to find out what is it. That's why when my babysitter locked on it, I told him to break lock. So I see he's not locking on the top of a mountain or something. Mm-hmm. So when he break locked, I saw it is above the horizon on the climbing path of me. So it couldn't be any, after 24,000 feet, couldn't be any mountain, top of mountain or something. And right. I told him to paint it. He repainted it again, and I could find out now that the size of it.
Now, when you say painted, what do you mean?
But with the radar, when the radar is operating.
To operate the radar and aim it at the thing.
Yes,
the radar sweep as the needle sweeps over the object. It's called painting.
Okay.
Yes, when it was sweeping, you could see the size of the target. What is it? So, because we had many practice of air refueling with the jumbo aircraft, I could imagine.
We only know that there were two for sure, and these beings were described by several different individuals and taken. One was taken by the military. This was the Army to two different hospitals in Varginha, Brazil. And at one of the hospitals, an orthopedic surgeon on staff was coerced by the military into performing the repair of a fractured leg on this alien being. The story is absolutely true. It's fantastic. It's been compared to Roswell, but I think it's going to far exceed the importance of Roswell because there are a continuous number of witnesses that are coming forth. This also involves the death of a military police officer who died under mysterious circumstances. And last year, another doctor with the name of Dr. Furtado came forth and told why this young 23-year-old Brazilian military police officer, Marco Eli Chareze, what went on and how he was treated and so on. And all indications looks like he died of a extreme viral infection, possibly similar to Ebola. So that's just a small slice of the story, Willie.
And you can read that story in Roger's book, which is available from any bookstore, and you can certainly get it on Amazon.com, which I would do if you don't have a copy. This case is one of the great all-time classics. Now, I would very much like to turn to General Jafari at this point, and because things are changing in the UFO world a lot. There is a more and more worldwide a groundswell of interest on the part of scientists to make some changes in the way that we deal, or rather don't deal, with this phenomenon. And some politicians are getting involved in this too. For example, the former Canadian Minister of Defense, Paul Hellyer, is about to give a speech at the University of Toronto entitled "Why Information Concerning Extraterrestrial-Related Phenomena and Government Involvement with These Issues is Still Being Withheld from the Public by Specific Western Nations." And that is going to be really a watershed speech, because it's the first time that anyone in any Western country of such high stature is going to make a statement like that this publicly in that kind of a forum. So things are changing, and I'm very pleased to welcome General Jafari to this radio program. General, in 1976 in September, engaged in one of the most incredible of all UFO experiences, the famous Tehran dogfight, the chase of a UFO over Tehran in September of 1976. He's going to give us his personal account of this, what became known as the Tehran dogfight. And also, we're going to discuss a document that he has obtained about the Tehran dogfight, written here in the United States. And we're going to hear some very new things today about the Tehran dogfight, and some new material as well from Dr. Roger Lear, who is with us. And Dr. Lear, before we start with General Jafari, why don't we just update you folks on Dr. Lear's current activities, which, as you know, are always extraordinary. Dr. Lear, welcome to the show.
Nice to be with you again, Whitley.
Well, thank you. Why don't you give us a little update? You've got a new book out, and why don't you tell us?
Yes, we have a new book on the 1996 Virginia, Brazil episode, simply entitled UFO Crash in Brazil. And it's the story of my personal investigation and interview with some outstanding witnesses, including an orthopedic surgeon who was forced by the military to perform a surgery on one of the alien beings.
Which is one of the all-time most extraordinary UFO stories that has ever been told. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about it?
Well, the Virginia case, essentially the date agreed upon is January the 20th of 1996, when NORAD had notified the Brazilian military that a craft was coming down. So they knew the exact geographical position of where and what time it was going to impact. The impact itself and approach was witnessed by several different people. One was a farmer, and he saw a cylindrical object coming down, and not actually in a crash mode, but slowly approaching, and the witness says that it would appear that there was a piece missing out of the back of it, and that it was trailing a vapor or smoke substance before it impacted. Now, this was the beginning, but certainly not the end of the story, because following this, there were possibly two alien beings that were seen. Now, one of the things I did during my investigation was try to remove the rumors from the facts. So in the book, I've dedicated a whole section to that, because some people report as many as 11 or 12 beings, but